Hello. It's just me. uh, yeah, so stuff kinda got a little bit weird in these last few weeks for us. Just a few days after we recorded the Land Before Time video that we did, uh, I got COVID. And then my entire have had troubles with um traveling, and like I had a whole thing where they had a plumbing issue, so they've been not available for like the past week and a half. And before that, I was pretty sick with COVID. Well, not very sick, but pretty sick. I'm relatively okay now. So it's just me. Hi. But to be honest, I actually asked, and they said they didn't really have that much to talk about because they've just been so busy this year with various things in their life they've had to do. So I guess I will have to talk about the stuff that I got to deal with this year. Besides, of course, what we've gone over. And I plan on hopefully not talking for 2 hours, but we'll see. So I guess we'll just sort of jump right into things. Starting off with various video games. And for me, when it comes to games, I very much am used to having like a few years where there's like nothing that I care about, and then there's a year where there's several things. And well, this is a year where there were a number of things. First off, I do want to say that I did not play Horizon Forbidden West because it's on the PS5, which I don't have, but I did see a playthrough of it, and I think the story of it is quite good, and I think how it expands on, what the first game did was quite good. I like, their take on California, I think is interesting, and, considering that's where I am. That said, I feel really bad for the series because the first game released like right before Breath of the Wild, and then everyone paid attention to that. And the second game released right next to Elden Ring, and then everyone paid attention to that. So I feel really bad that the series keeps releasing right around like other games that just take everyone's focus away from it, which is a shame. But you know, that's what happens, I guess. So oh well. But yeah, that seems pretty promising. But the other thing that happened at the very beginning of the year, we got Pokemon Legends Arceus, and I think this is a very interesting game in terms of what it's trying to do, and I think for the most part it accomplishes it. There's definitely some kind of rough around the edges, little pieces that don't work like super well, but overall, as sort of a new kind of Pokemon experience, I think it's done very well, and I'm glad they kind of took this in kind of a little bit of a different direction for this game. I'm also very curious what this means for the future of this, because I remember this game was actually quite popular, quite well received, which is a first for like any Pokemon game. Well, Turf Sleeves are well received anyway, because it seems like everyone's hated on everything that Pokemon's released since like Gen 5. So, and even actually, I should say that because everyone hated Gen 5 when that was first released too. So it's just, anyway. But yeah, there was a lot of positive reception for this, which I'm glad. There's definitely a lot of potential for them to continue with this. I think a Legends game set in Unova would be a perfect follow-up for this, considering what we know about the backstory of those games. I think having the areas and having them where it's definitely a lot of familiar aspects and places you could recognize if you, of course, played Diamond and Pearl, as well as characters, of course. But at the same time, I don't think like you need it to enjoy the game again. Like Julie played the game; she's never played Gen 4, and she really liked it as well. So yeah, that's the whole thing about sneaking up on Pokemon and catching them without having to battle them, and just the general sort of, I don't know, the game kind of has a bit of a different vibe to it than the original games. I think is really cool, and I actually would like if they sort of went even in different directions, where they basically take sort of the Pokemon framework but apply it to even more other types of games, even further. Which we'll see how this can be expanded on. I did this is like kind of the one thing I really wanted to talk to my Dara about, but apparently they haven't finished the game yet because they've been so busy with stuff. So yeah, they wouldn't be able to talk about like the most surprising part of the game basically being the ending, I guess. But yeah, it was good. It was a fun game, fun experience. Glad I got to experience it. Definitely think it was worth it. And I'm very curious to see how they continue forward from there. On the other hand, near the end, a month and a half ago, we had Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and I'm just gonna say, yes, the performance is not good. Yes, it's glitchy. Should those things be better? Yes, they should. However, I think the fact that that seems to be the only thing people are talking about, and even people were like, I've brought in this game up in conversation, and people overhear me, and I've had this happen multiple times, where people say, "Hey, isn't that game super glitchy?" And like, if that's the only thing that people know about this game, that's a real shame because there's a lot of stuff done in Scarlet and Violet that is really well done. Again, I'm not going to say the performance is good or that like it, oh, you should look past it. I'm not saying that, but acting like that's the only thing to talk about for this game is not fair because again, this sort of open world style with Pokemon, I think is I think it's honestly done better than I thought it would be. To be perfectly honest, I thought it would feel a little bit more awkward, but it doesn't. I think it's honestly not that awkward. I do think the region maybe could be a little bit more interesting in terms of the variety of locations to go through. Um, but I overall, for example, like the new Pokemon, um, and I just sort of like how it's the presentation of it. Again, not talking like the visuals or performance. I mean, just in terms of like the scenario of the game laid out in front of you. I think works well for facilitating this type of game. Um, the one criticism that I have heard beyond the performance stuff is how, oh, I wish the levels scaled. And the thing is, that sounds like an easy and quick fix that is obvious, but I don't think it is. Because if you think about it, it's like, oh, because immediately here's, oh, I wish the gym scaled. And it's like, okay, well, if the gym scale, first of all, the gym leaders are going to have 8 different teams, which in some cases is actually kind of hard to figure out what to do for that. Like, for example, spoilers, I guess, for gym leader teams, Rhyme has a Toxtricity, which she terastallizes into a ghost type. If you were to theoretically go fight her first, what is she supposed to just have a Toxel, which, like, sucks? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like you'd have to kind of completely rearrange the teams. Sometimes it's not as simple as just, oh yeah, just scale them and have them evolve or whatever. Like, it's not quite that simple all the time. And then it's like, okay, wait, so you have the gym leaders Pokemon that are, would scale, which, well, then there's also several gyms where you have to fight other trainers, so they would have to scale too. But then what about like the trainers that are just out in the world? Like, do they not scale? Because that'd be super. I feel like it'd be weirder where here's a bunch of trainers that are like level 40 that are surrounding a town, which if you just happen to go there first, then they're like level 15. What? Like, that seems weirder, honestly, than just having them all be level 40. And then, of course, if the trainers are scaling, that means you have to do all the work for all the trainers. But then also, like, what about the wild Pokemon? Should they not scale as well in that case? Because that'd also be super weird. Here's all these trainers in this area. The trainers are all like level 15, but the Pokemon are all like level 45. What? That doesn't make any sense either. So, and then also this game really focuses on the idea that like the gyms, the Titans, and the star bases are all like equal to each other. So why is it just scaling based off the gyms? What about the other stuff, right? And I think scaling based on those is even more complicated. It's just I think the idea of the level scaling is one of those things which sounds like an obvious idea and like an obvious thing to do, but if you think about it, it's just logistically so much harder to do and do it well than just having it all be flat levels. And honestly, also part of the issue is that if it all scales, well, then nothing's ever really like you can't really challenge yourself then, right? Like for example, I went to go fight the ground Titan was the second Titan I fought. I had 3 badges or maybe 4 badges. I think it was 3. When I went to fight them, and I was like 10 levels below them. And I beat them, and that was actually pretty cool that I was able to do that, right? So you wouldn't be able to do that if everything was scaling. So I actually, and also the fact that you kind of have this rush of like, here's this high level area, and I'm weaving around all these wild Pokemon that could totally destroy me, but I'm able to, weave around them and get to where I want to go. Besides that, I think that's cool and interesting. And the fact that like when you go to a city or whatever, you can then fly back to it later it means that even if you go to a city and oh this gym is way higher level than me, it's like well okay, but you can just now it's much easier to get back to there later. So so I like it as it is. I actually think they should not scale the levels, um, in terms of that. The only other criticism that I've heard that I actually agree with really is it's a criticism which is almost like it's not really criticism. Basically, it's that the end of the game is so good that like they should have done that the whole final thing. They should have kind of incorporated that more with the main story. And again, I don't want to spoil things, but like and like I understand because the ending part of the game basically makes me want a Xenoblade style game of like a party going through this big world that just has Pokemon in it. Like I want that to be a thing because that's what the ending reminded me of, and you just would have to completely redo the game from the ground up in order to have that kind of interaction throughout the whole game. So yeah, but I will say again, the ending of the game I think is extremely good. Um, and if this game ran well, not even like super well, but just like decently well, could this be my favorite Pokemon game? It could be. It's definitely up there. But I don't know if. But basically, the question is, how much does the performance in glitches? How much does that lower the ranking? And I don't know the answer to that for me personally. I don't know. I had a lot of fun with the game. Again, not excusing the performance issues, but even despite those, I had a lot of fun with the game. I think the story and characters are overall done quite well. And I don't know. I feel like people are not giving this game as much credit for the good things that it does do. They're just focusing on the bad stuff that it does, which is there, but I feel like there's a lot more to talk about versus, what people act like there is. Also, I will say that there's been several people now who I've seen who play like through like the Team Star stuff, and they completely miss the point because they just don't read, which is very frustrating. So, anyway. But yeah, overall, that's kind of my opinion on that. I did get Scarlet, by the way, which is also why I happen to choose the Scarlet image to be the one that goes up there, but anyway. Another game that I did briefly play when that came out was Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which I, to be honest, almost forgot that it came out this year. And as a sort of first transition to 3D, full 3D for like a full Kirby game, it's done very well. I don't think it's quite my favorite Kirby game. I still think Amazing Mirror is my personal favorite, but it definitely could have been a hell of a lot worse. And it's very impressive what they did manage to do with the game. If you're maybe on the fence about it, you should get it as a fun 3D platformer. It works quite well, and the environments are nice. There's some really nice music in the games. The finale, of course, is peak Kirby finale, if you know what that means. It's just a good time, so there's that. And then the last thing that I briefly want to talk about is Xenoblade 3. I need to find people to talk about this with, because I have so much to say about this game, and it's like all spoilery, so I don't want to say it now, but I think this is the best of the three. I think it is the best of the three, and this is one of my favorite games of all time, honestly. It does so many things extremely well. The only thing that I think that it does worse than the other two games, I think everything else is done at least like equal to or even better, is the world itself. In terms of like exploring it, it's not bad by any means, and compared to most games it's quite good, but I think the Xenoblade 1 and 2 worlds were a little bit more interesting to explore. But that's kind of it. I think the combat is better in this game. I have seen people say that like Xenoblade 2's combat is more interesting, and I would say maybe I would agree with that, but the problem is it takes so much longer to sort of figure it out, whereas this combat, I feel like it's a lot easier to kind of get a handle on, which helps me a lot, because I always felt like I kind of like didn't quite understand how Xenoblade 2 works, whereas I don't feel that case for this game. And then in terms of the story and characters, I think this is the best. I've seen people criticize the story of this game. I've seen people say that basically after chapter 5 that it kind of goes downhill. I've seen people say that this story doesn't like have a point considering how it ends, to which I say like, do you know what character growth is? Do you know what themes are? Do you know like how just stories work? Like saying that like the story of this was pointless, or that like nothing happened because of how the ending is, just comes off as really dumb. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, I'm not saying you have to love it, but it's just like, if you say stuff like that, I'm just like, did you just like literally like not pay attention to like any English class you even had in high school? Like, come on. It's just, and I'm not a like an English narrative or literary person, but it seemed like there's like, I'm reading stuff on Reddit and people's comments, and I'm just like, you're all missing like really obvious stuff that is like very clear in terms of, again, allusions and, again, themes and all that kind of stuff that people are just very obviously missing. And again, like oftentimes, but the main thing I've seen, like a lot of people say, the villains are lame. The villains aren't meant because people are like, oh, like I've seen people who are like, the villains aren't a surprise, and I'm like, that's not a criticism that the villains aren't a surprise. Like, come on, you have a game where like, yeah, you know who the villains are from the beginning. That's not the interesting. The interesting is the whole scenario of the whole story in the world, and what the villains are in terms of like, again, related to the world, and why are they doing what they're doing, and the whole sort of characterization surrounding them. It's not that, oh, they're a surprise. Like, that's not the interesting part. And I don't know. I think I really love the characterization of this. I think the story of this is very well done. There are like I think it slows down a little bit for like again after chapter 5, but not enough to say that like the story gets bad by any means. And I think the ending is actually very good. I think it's actually very interesting in terms of how it's handled. And I'm actually really curious to see what they do for the sort of epilogue story DLC they've teased for next year. Um, but yeah, I love this game. I absolutely love it, and I sped through this game. I because it came out shortly near the end of my summer break before I start teaching again. So I was worried that I was like, I have to finish this like as soon as possible. So I sped through this game in like 6 days, um, and yeah, I very much just sped all the way through this. I definitely skipped a lot of stuff. I did get all the heroes, but I didn't like do any of the Ascension quests, for example. So yeah, there's definitely more that I need to do for this game, and but I have actually. This is one of the few games where right after I've beaten it, I've watched other people playing through it as well. I've been watching Tom Fox play it. I've been watching. He's the main one. And then who's Harry McIntyre, who's the voice actor for Noah, the main character of this game, is streaming this game, and I've been watching his videos. That's actually been really interesting, kind of seeing his perspective on things. So yeah, whereas most other games, I don't. Even if I do watch a stream of it, it's usually noticeably later. This has been kind of immediately going into it. Um, yeah, it's just I think it's extremely well done. I have any sort of complaint I have is just like very minor balancing mechanical stuff, or it's something where it's like this could be better than it already is, even though it's still pretty good now. So if that's all I have to say negative about a game, yeah, I think it's very, very well done. So that's that. And again, if I had to pick like a game of the year or something, then obviously I would pick Xenoblade 3. Which I didn't expect it to win the whole Game of the Year awards things that they have. Like I'm like Elden Ring is definitely going to win, which it did. So I wasn't like deluded in thinking that oh it might actually win. No, it wasn't. But just the fact that it was nominated was enough for me, honestly. So yeah, there's that. Um, so that's pretty much it for me for games. Again, they kind of just said about how they liked Legends Arceus, but they didn't finish it because they haven't time and they haven't even played Scarlet or Violet yet. So yeah. Oh, they did say that they played more Breath of the Wild, which they enjoyed. So there's that too. Um, I also didn't. In terms of movies, there's actually very little that I watched outside of again the stuff that we watched together. Um, I did watch Thor: Love and Thunder. So I watched. Okay, in terms of MCU stuff, I watched Thor: Love and Thunder, and I watched Doctor Strange, which I watched that on my own in theaters, which is not up on this list. I'm not going to talk about it because that is up for us to watch through Movie Monday next year. So I'll talk about my opinion of the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness then. Um, Thor: Love and Thunder. The criticism that I always hear is that there's too much comedy, and I don't agree with that. I think Ragnarok had more comedy. The problem is that the comedy in this movie is more invasive to the actual story, where the story will just sort of stop to be comedic. Whereas Ragnarok, it was just kind of throughout the whole thing, and it flowed a lot better. The pacing of this movie, of Thor: Love and Thunder, is not very good. The first like half of this movie is very fast, and it comes off as weird and like, wait, what the hell is happening? We're here, no, now we're here, now we're here, now. It's very, very quick. The second half slows down a lot more, and the second half is much better, where things kind of get slow down, they get more serious. Stuff with the villain that's done pretty well. There's some visual stuff that's done that's actually kind of cool. And the ending kind of climax, the climax of the movie is that it's kind of like it's goofy, but in a way that I like. So I think that works pretty well. But it's mainly the first half that's just kind of like, oh boy, it's a little bit hard to sit through again in terms of the pacing being weird, and again like the jokes, like the screaming goats are just so annoying. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily like that there's too many jokes. It's just they're just done much more poorly than they could have been. And also in terms of again like the characterization, I think it's like not bad. It's just sort of like I kind of want to like more. Again, the first half would help with that too. I will say this movie does feel like kind of unnecessary. Like again, speaking of stuff that feels kind of weird at the end of the end of the movie, like the end, feel like, oh, this is kind of not worth it. Like the only character that really feels like changed at all was Thor, which is valid, but I don't know. Like that's kind of it. Like for example, you can even see with the poster and the trailers that Jane Foster's back in this, and they kind of don't do anything with her. Like in terms of her character specifically from the beginning of this movie to the end of this movie, I guess there is a change, but it's not much, and it's done in a way where I kind of, again, not to be spoiler, it's, I don't know, it just feels kind of like at the end, like when I finished the movie, my reaction was, they did that with Jane? Okay, so what? Like that was my opinion basically. So yeah, I don't know. The overall opinion of the movie is basically, I guess overall it's fine, but it's better than the first two Thor movies. But it's Ragnarok is definitely better. So there's that. Um, oh, I did also watch Eternals, which yeah, it's probably the worst MCU film. It's not horrible. It's just not very good. Um, so, but that's it. I've seen people treat Eternals like it's like much worse than everything else that the MCU's done, and that's not true. Um, it's about the same level as like Dark World or like Iron Man 2. It's just kind of meh. This is one of the few things where I've seen a few other people say this, where like it should have been a series. I've seen a lot of people say that like the Disney Plus shows it should have been movies instead. This is the movie that should have been a series because they could have spent a lot more time with like what they did characters in the past and kind of building up this team working together, so that the whole premise of this movie, which is the team is falling apart and we need to bring them back together, and like that would actually work a lot better if we gave a shit about the team, which we don't. So again, it's not awful. I am kind of curious to see where they go with this because, you know, considering how the movie ends, I don't know if that means it's going to be an Eternals 2 or if they're just going to sort of take that ending and squeeze it into something else. I don't know. I'm kind of curious how that works, but yeah, the movie itself is just kind of whatever, not really that great. So, yeah. Um, but again, it's not really much to say about that. I have not seen Black Panther: Wakanda Forever uh, yet. Um, I plan to at some point, probably when it's on Disney Plus. Um, also, I know the Avatar sequel was just released. I'm actually seeing the Avatar sequel uh, Monday, so I can't talk about that right now. But my opinion of the first one, if we remember from the 300 movie challenge thing we did of it, is that it's decent, pretty good. So we'll see how I feel about this. I don't know, but yeah, not too much stuff with movies besides that. Now, in terms of shows, I have had a big thing involving shows for the last few years. And I didn't make a show video this year because, to be honest, I don't feel like there's that much to talk about. And it's partly because I didn't watch as many shows as I did before, but also because a lot of shows that I did watch, my opinion is basically, it's decent. And it's overall pretty good. And that's kind of all I have to say. So, I am going to say that, well, okay. I'm going to show here on the screen, I'm going to show up basically a tier list I put together of every show that I have seen this year. And so I'll briefly run through everything just to list everything out. So the top tier you can see is very good. This is stuff that I watched and I was like, wow, this is really good. I really like this. There's some range here, obviously, but yeah, it's very well done. And those are shows would include the show. There's Pantheon, Tales from the Loop, Andor, the second half of season 2 of the Owl House, as well as the first thing of season 3 that was released this year. Hilda and the Hall of the Mountain King, which is technically a movie, but it's part of the show's canon, so I'm including that. And then also The Boys season 3. So I really like all of those. The stuff on the left is lit higher than the stuff on the right, but they're all still done really well. The quite good category, this is stuff where it was good and I liked it. It doesn't really have any big problems, but it may have some small issues, but the main thing is didn't just like grab me as much as the tier above, and that includes Inside Job season 2, Rick and Morty season 6, Tales of the Jedi, Hell of a Boss, and season 3 of Harley Quinn. So I don't have too much to say about those. They're good. I like them. Inside Job season 2 actually kind of surprised me because I thought season 1 was pretty good, but season 2 was actually like even better, I thought. Especially the last 2 episodes were actually like legitimately emotional. So like, okay, damn. And I'm curious to see how they continue with that show going forward. Okay, so the next 3 tiers 3, 4, and 5, are not necessarily like, it's not like tier 3 is not necessarily higher than tier 4, which is not necessarily higher than tier 5. They're just sort of different opinions where all of those shows in those 3 tiers kind of fall in the same overall group. So the third tier, it says overall good, but has some issues that hold it back. Basically, these shows would have been in the quite good tier if not for a few things that dropped them down. And those includes Cyberpunk Edge Runners, the season 2 of Green Eggs and Ham, the Obi-Wan show, Ms. Marvel, the Book of Boba Fett, and Dragon Prince season 4. Um, so I guess I could kind of talk about those a little bit more, but I'll save that for a little once I get through everything else here. Um, Actually, no, I'll just talk about it right now. So Cyberpunk Edge Runners, I've seen a lot of people say that like, oh, this is like 2022's equivalent of Arcane, right, from last year. And again, base premise of it, yes, it's an stylistically animated show for adults based on a video game. But you don't like need the video game, to like watch the show. That's done quite well. Yes, that's true. Arcane is noticeably better. Like Arcane to me was fantastic. Cyberpunk Edge Runners, the problem with Cyberpunk Edge Runners is it's too short. The entire show, it's 10 episodes, 22-minute episodes. Arcane was 9 episodes that are like 45 minutes, and also that Arcane is season 1. Like there's more. This show is over, okay? So the entire show is like half the length of season 1 of Arcane. And that's a problem because I might get the episode numbers wrong here, but basically the first 6 episodes of Cyberpunk Edge Runners is a really good like opening arc to the show. Like it kind of establishes the main characters. There's a sort of inciting incident to sort of like get the plot rolling. It culminates in a sort of kind of mini climax that changes the status quo going forward. That's all done very well. I don't really have any complaints with how that's done there. But then you have like episode 7, which is just kind of the characters sort of dealing with kind of mentally like the aftermath of the last episodes, and there is a bit of a time jump where it's like here's our new here's the new status quo. Excuse me. Which then transitions into episodes 8, 9, and 10, which is the finale of the show, and it's the final arc. And like it's good, it works as a finale, but like there needed to be a middle to this show. There's a good beginning, there's a good ending, there's no middle. And that's the problem, because the middle is where you actually get to like really into the characters and like the characters. And I like the characters, but I feel like I barely have enough time with them. Especially outside of like David. And so that's the problem, I think. That's kind of my main issue with the show. Again, overall, it's still pretty good. I still rank it quite high. It's the far left side of that tier, meaning it is good, but there should have been more to the show. That's kind of my main issue with it. I actually don't really have too much to say about season 2 of Green Eggs and Ham. I just think the story and the setting is just not quite as interesting as season 1. I think season 1 and also the story scenario was more fun, more engaging. Season 2 is not quite there, hence why it's in this category. Obi-Wan. Okay. This is the thing that I've heard to people that say it should have been a movie. And originally, the original idea was that it was going to be a movie, like the solo movie. But then they ended up kind of getting cold feet because that didn't perform very well. The thing is, this is only 6 episodes, and some of the episodes are quite short. They're like 35 minutes. So I think if you were to cut out all of the like last time on, montages and like the end credits of every episode, you'd probably get like a 3.5 hour long series. Which I feel like without too much difficulty, you could edit this down to be about like a 2.5 hour movie. And I think that would have been better. Partly because the pacing would have been better, and also because it would have prevented like a lot of stupid complaints. Because there were a lot of complaints about stuff in the beginning of the show that is answered by the time you get to the end of the show. The main one I've seen was all about like, oh, Riva, like her actress is bad because she's trying to come off as intimidating, but she's failing. Turns out that's the fucking point of her character. So complaining that the character's not believable and being threatening, that's the point. So like if that was a movie that was released all at once, people wouldn't be complaining for like a few weeks about this. So there's that, which is just like kind of not great. Again, there is some kind of pacing stuff and some plot things that are kind of weird just in the middle. There's that whole scene early on when like Leia's like gets captured by like the goons that's like really awkward. So like that's not good. Oh, and by the way, I actually liked younger Leia in this show. I've seen people criticize her that she's like weird. I think younger Leia would be weird. Like, I don't really have the criticism of, like, she's not a believable child. And I'm like, yeah, Leia as a child is probably gonna be fucking weird. So, like, I don't really have a criticism of that. And I think her, in this story kind of helps with Obi-Wan. And I've seen people say that, oh, Obi-Wan's, like, kind of seems distracted and not really focused. And I'm like, yeah, that's his character at this point. So, like, I don't know. I liked the show. And, of course, the ending of it's really well done. but it's definitely awkward in its pacing, and there's definitely some moments which are like, why did you do this? So I acknowledge that. Um, Ms. Marvel, we had a whole show Sunday about Ms. Marvel where we watched that, so there's more opinions there. Basically, my criticism is that the actual plot and villains of the show are not very good. What makes up for it is the characters are super likable, and just the whole thing with the family and sort of the environment, the social environment that's surrounding characters is really well done, and it's just really likable. It's really nice kind of seeing the culture and just the family and the friends all kind of hanging out and doing stuff together. That's all done very, very well. Which I think would be kind of lost if this was a movie. Like, I've heard people say this should have been a movie, and I don't really agree with that, because the actual movie part of this, being like the plot and like with the villains, is the worst part of it. So again, it's not bad, but it's not very good. But the rest of it is good enough that I would put it up here. The Book of Boba Fett. Okay, so the main thing I've seen is that people say like that this is sort of Mandalorian season 2.5, which it is, because again, there's like 2 episodes that completely focus on, Mandalorian and Baby Yoda, Grogu, whatever. And I've seen a lot of people say that, like, oh, those are the best episodes. I don't know if I would agree with that. And the thing is, like, I don't like those episodes being in the show because it takes away from Boba Fett. And I actually like what they do with Boba Fett in this show, which apparently a lot of people don't like that. But I actually like what they did with Boba Fett. It's just the fact that you throw in these other 2 episodes in here in the middle just makes the pacing weird. And it is kind of just, there's some weird decisions. Again, like, there's going to be people who go from Mandalorian Season 2 to Mandalorian Season 3 next year, and they're going to be confused. Like, wait, what the fuck? Huh? Like, when did this change? Because it happened in this show. So there are some weird decisions with that. I don't know. I think I like this show more than other people do, I think, but I definitely acknowledge that it does have problems. Dragon Prince Season 4... I don't really have much to say about this, but the main criticism is just, it feels dumber. The characters feel dumber. It feels like they kind of force it to be comedic when it doesn't necessarily need to be. The pacing is a little weird, but the problem with Dragon Prince is that, like, seasons 1, 2, and 3 of Dragon Prince together felt like one full season. So if you, like, just watch season 1 of Dragon Prince by itself, it is kind of bare bones and not that much happens. Whereas we know seasons 4 and then the upcoming season 5 are going to tie together into one full thing, and then season 6 and 7 are going to tie to another full thing. So I'm kind of holding off on the whole thing about the pacing or that the plot's a little weird right now, until we see season 5. But it is a little weird as it is now, so there's that. Again, I think there's some people who are like, season 4 Dragon Prince is bad, it's terrible, it sucks. And I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. But I do think it's could have been better than it was. And then you have the category which says standard good, not much to say. Well, yeah, there's just kind of not much to say about these shows. And these include Moon Knight, The Batman, which is one of the older shows from the early 2000s to early mid 2000s that I watched. I've been kind of watching older shows for the last few years, but there's only 2 that I actually really watched this year. One is The Batman. The other is later in this tier. It's X-Men Evolution. And yeah, X-Men Evolution was also kind of an early 2000s thing. I'll talk a little bit more about those. But the other stuff that's in this tier is we have Agretsuko Season 4, Sonic Prime, Little Demon, and the second half of Young Justice Season 4. Again, I don't really have too much to say about these. For mostly, it's just like, it's pretty good. So, I don't really have much to go on for any of these. I do like both The Batman and X-Men Evolution. The Batman, it was sort of... I think a lot of people missed it because it was airing kind of right when Justice League Unlimited was going on, so most people were watching that. It focuses on, like, a younger Bruce Wayne and as being Batman, and, like, the first 2 episodes is actually focused a lot on how he kind of is working with, like, the Gotham police. And then... Did I say episodes? I meant seasons. And then seasons 3 and 4 are about introducing Batgirl and Robin. And then season 5 is about kind of introducing them to sort of the larger DC world. I think this show is at its best in season 4, where you have Batman, Batgirl, and Robin working off each other, and that actually works quite well. Season 5 is a little bit of a step down. I just think it's not quite as interesting, but overall it's a pretty solid show. Not like amazing Batman stuff, but it's good. It's got some fun stuff in it, so it's done pretty well. Meanwhile, X-Men Evolution. So I don't have a lot of history with X-Men. I actually tried watching the 90s X-Men show, and honestly, I couldn't get very far. It's just sort of the style of it was like so 90s that I don't know. Those kind of shows from back then have a very much like a narrative style and a characterization style that I just don't gel with well at all. So I couldn't do, go very far with it. Yeah, excuse me, I got a cough. Yeah, trying not to lose my voice here, but again, I had COVID kind of recently, so yeah. Um, but yeah, so X Men Evolution, it focused on most of the X Men are actually like high school students who are going to a normal high school while also doing the actual X Men stuff through, Professor X. You do have a few more adult ones again: Professor X, Beast, Wolverine, Storm, Mystique, Magneto. They're like adults, but everyone else is like a teenager pretty much. There's a few others that I'm forgetting, but I could see this being a little off-putting for some people. I personally thought it worked pretty well. This show, okay, so this show started airing in 2000. It is very early 2000s, so I just said how like the 90s X-Men show was kind of like a bit much for me itself. I could totally see that people not getting into this style because it's very much an early 2000s show. There's definitely kind of an early 2000s cringe to it, which I don't know. I thought it was fine that I could kind of get into it, but I could see people definitely be putting off from this. The best part about the show is season 4 specifically. I think it was season 4, the second to last season, which was the build up to Apocalypse. So Apocalypse is sort of the ultimate season villain, and the build up to him is done very well. And there's even an episode that actually kind of follows the build up. That's again, it's the first episode of the last season, where something happens that's like legitimately shocking. Like, oh shit, they did that? Like, oh damn, right? And I wanted to see where this is gonna go. The problem is that the actual stuff they do with Apocalypse is kind of boring. Like, it's not awful. It's just it doesn't match the hype and the build-up that was happening beforehand. So there's that. Also, the show ends in a weird way, where it's just sort of like, here's the stuff we would do if we had another season, but we're not going to do it. And it's like, okay. So yeah, again, if you can get into the vibe of it, a generally lighter tone show with some stuff that is actually quite dark and kind of fucked up, then you could check it out. But otherwise, yeah, there's really not much to say about the other stuff here. They're fine. They work decently well. There's not too, but I don't really have much to say in advance. And then we have, okay, so on its own tier, it says not great, but way better than everyone says, and that is She-Hulk Attorney at Law. I don't think the show is amazing. It's not amazing. It definitely has issues. But people fucking hate the show, and I don't know. Well, no, I know why, but like, you should not hate the show. At worst, you just should think the show is just kind of meh, right? Which I think it's better than meh. But like, come on, the hate that the show has gotten is ridiculous. People take the show so fucking seriously when it's obviously a comedy, and a lot of the people are picking out like lines that Jen is saying as if this is like, see, look, this is what the writers think about like, MCU, and it's like fucking, oh my god, it was a joke. Like, come on. It's embarrassing, honestly. The insane hatred for this show is embarrassing. Again, I'm not saying you have to like it. There are people who don't like it, who have kind of reasonable points. They're just like, it's not a show for me, and this part's kind of and I don't like this aspect. Fine, valid. But the ridiculous amount of hate for the show is insane. I don't want to talk about this very much, because I'm just going to get full of, because I don't want to focus on, again, all the stuff that's just, full of hatred about this stuff. But, if you want videos that kind of go into the show in a way that I think is actually more fair, Nando V Movies has a good vid on this. Cosmonaut Variety Hour has a good vid on this. And then, Sarah Zed doesn't have a video on She-Hulk specifically, but she has a video that's called Sacrificial Trash, which goes into basically this phenomenon of extreme visceral hatred of a show or movie, and how a lot of times it's just not valid. They're not warranted to the degree it is. Her main example is High Guardian Spice, but she does bring up She-Hulk with this, so go watch that video to kind of get the sense of this. So I don't want to talk about the show anymore, because it's going to just involve people being mad, so yeah. And then below that, we have two shows I just say are just kind of fine. This is sort of like, fine, not much to say, and that's Close Enough Season 3, and I also love Death and Robots Season 3. It's more of the previous seasons. They're fine. Not much else to say. And then, last category, it says, I still don't know what to think about these. And those are Centaur World and the second part of Mushoku Tensei. Centaur World, Well, sorry to cough again. Um, it's one of those shows where like it's so like, oh look, we're all so happy and everything's so wonderful and perfect that like you know that there's something fucked up below the surface, and there is. I just don't know if it's executed super well in terms of how the show works. And like I go back and forth on this show so much. I've thought about like sometimes I think about the show and I'm like, ah, that stuff was actually done really well. And then think about other stuff and I'm just like, man, this show bothers me. So like I'm all up in the air with the show. I don't know how to think about it. I feel like there was a video that I watched about it that kind of gave my opinions on it, but I don't remember who made the video, so that's not helpful. Um, some people love the show, some people hate the show. I don't know. I don't think I love or hate it. I'm definitely into the like or dislike or in the mixed or I don't know, but it's a thing. And then lastly we have their Mushoku Tensei, which is okay. So I watched the first half of Mushoku Tensei last year, and I basically said that like it's decent, but it feels weird, partly because again it's this sort of part one, and it just sort of kind of the pacing of it is weird if you view this as a full season, which you shouldn't really. If anything, this whole thing, part one and part two, should be viewed as one season. Now, what I thought was that actually this was like the show, but it's not. This is actually supposed to be a season one. And so my opinion last year was basically kind of like, I'm into it, but it's gonna have to see how part two goes. And my opinion now is basically, well, part two went and I'm still unsure. So there, I don't even know like where to begin with. There's so much just stuff here that's like, okay. The big thing about the show is that like, you know, it's, oh, look at these characters being perverted and like see how wrong that is, and it's like, sure, but you're still doing it. So, you know, it's like there's like sometimes it kind of fits based on again what they're going for in the moment, but sometimes it's like you just threw in scenes just to be perverted. Like there's this side character who's like this like elf person who's, you know, journeying with Roxy, who's to do something. I don't really know. I think they're trying to find Rudy. But that wasn't the original plan. I think whatever. You have this character who literally her entire character is just that she wants to fuck a lot of people, and like almost every scene she's in, she's talking about it or actually doing it, and it's like you serve no purpose other than to just be like perv bait. Like that's the only purpose you serve in this story. Why are you in this story? And then okay, I have to spoil the ending of this whole thing because it's just fucking ridiculous. Okay, so one thing I also don't understand about the show before I get to that is that like this show tries to act like again, oh, Roxy, Eris, and Sylphie are like the three girls, and like who's Rudius gonna end up with or whatever. And like at least in terms of season one, it is not equivalent at all. Like Sylphie is basically not in this series after the beginning stuff, you know, when she's introduced. Again, she's in the fucking like after credits stinger at the end of, you know, season one. That's it. She's not in part two, the second half at all. Roxy, again, there's this sort of side plot with her traveling with these other people, like that horny elf lady, and like the stuff they do with her, like in when she goes to her home village, is like decent, but like it's very much disconnected from Rudius. So like, you know, there's not there. Meanwhile, Eris is traveling with Rudius for like the whole fucking series. So like obviously they spend the most time together. So like obviously it makes sense that like they're the ones who are gonna. It's I don't understand the kind of like the sort of I don't know if marketing is the right word, but sort of the it's like the show is trying to pretend there's an equivalency between these three characters when there obviously isn't. And okay, the thing with whole Rudius and Eris, it's weird, and I mean they treat it as if it is weird, but like okay, so near the end of the show, or near the end of this season, they like formally, you know, like have sex and hook up. And first of all, yes, they're like 15. This is kind of weird, but I think actually, wait, no, they are like 15 at this point. Anyway, so yes, that's weird and kind of uncomfortable that we sort of see that happening, but whatever. The choices they make for this though, first of all, Eris literally is fucking like you know, good. I'm kind of wondering what they say in the Japanese version because I watched this in the English dub and she says that like her mother told her this or something, and she's like, Drew's like told me like let me be your little kitty cat. And I'm just like, oh my god, why did you write that? It's just like so fucking. I'm just like literally almost just atomically cringed myself into oblivion. And then you know they do it, and the next day, she leaves, and she's like, I can't be with you because I'm weak and I couldn't protect you. And it's just like, I fucking hate this plotline, I hate this character scene where it's like these characters get together, they're like, oh, everything's great, we love it, but like, oh, I'm not strong enough for you, so I'm gonna leave and like make you miserable. This fucking happens. It's so much shit, and it's so annoying. I hate it every time. They kind of did this at the end of Dragon Prince, or not the end of Dragon Prince, but they did it with like, because there was that book that apparently came out between season 3 and 4 that apparently did this, and I'm just like, why did you do that? And it's just, I don't get it. It's like the writers of so many shows think that once characters get together, there's nothing you can do with them character wise, which is bullshit. And this sort of forced like half breakup is a fucking waste of time. I hate that they do this shit. And then it's like, okay, so now it's like now all the characters who like were in their parties, they're all like doing their own shit now. I don't know, like it's just a situation where I don't know how to feel about the show. It's just I don't know if I want to watch season 2 whenever that happens. It's I don't know. I don't know. But I do want to talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that I really really liked. For one, Andor was very good. Most people should know about that by now. At least anyone who's involved with Star Wars stuff, that Andor was very good. I don't really have too much to say about Andor because I feel like Star Wars Explained has basically said everything I want to say about it. Which, to be honest, Star Wars Explained, actually, I need to give a shout out to Star Wars Explained YouTube channel because they're pretty much the only Star Wars content that I actually follow online because they're actually, like, very positive in terms, and I'm not saying that they overly praise stuff, but they focus on the positive things. They'll talk about the problems in like shows or movies, but the focus will be on what is done well. And I'm so appreciative of that because basically every other fandom, especially Star Wars and Pokemon does this too very much, where they absolutely focus on totally the opposite, where that everything is bad and actually everything's horrible and yeah, okay, the whole thing is irredeemable. And this guy's like, no, this, and this is done really well. Yeah, this thing's not so great. Okay, fine. But this stuff is done well. Here's why. And I appreciate that so much. So if you ever are like, if you like Star Wars stuff and you just hate the fandom, please go watch stuff from Star Wars Explained. I think it's very well done. Basically, everything that he says about, honestly, all of the Star Wars shows, I agree with. Including the stuff with Andor, I think is done very well. So that's just kind of my little shout out for that. But then we have, okay, the top 2 shows that I watched this year are the top things that top tier. Pantheon and Tales from the Loop. Pantheon is an animated series on fucking AMC Plus, so like nobody's watched it. Thankfully, apparently they're already working on a season 2, which I'm actually very grateful for because I assumed there was not going to be any more. Because again, nobody watched it. But apparently the original contract for the show was that there was going to be 2 seasons, so okay, good. Go watch the trailer. That's all I really want to say about this, is to watch the trailer. The trailer is fine. At least the trailer's fine at establishing what the story's about, but it doesn't really convey how good the show actually is. The writing of the show is extremely good. The characterization is extremely good. Just what the characters end up doing and how the show presents those things is done very, very well. There's a lot of scenes that are just characters talking, but yet it's still done very well. There's some of the most tense scenes that I've seen are literally just characters talking, but you feel the tension in this. It's done very well. I have pretty much no criticisms to give for Pantheon. It's a very, very good show. You should watch it because almost nobody has. I'm probably going to have it be a show Sunday for us to watch, for me to show my entire later because I think it's worth it. And then we have Tales from the Loop. Now, this is a show based on a book that was kind of mostly an art book with kind of a story kind of loosely attached to it by, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce the guy's name. His name is Swedish. It's Simon. It's written like it's Stålenhag, but it's the A with a circle above it, and I think that you actually might pronounce it like Stålenhag, so I'm not sure. But anyway, and sorry, the premise of this show is that there is a particle accelerator that was put in, below a town. In the book, it's a town in Sweden. In the show, it's a town in the U.S. And then because of that, like weird new technology and sort of other stuff kind of just sort of starts popping up, and it's the residents of the town sort of dealing with the ramifications of that. The book definitely kind of goes into a bit of a different direction than the series does. The series basically sort of takes the setting and sort of the style of the book, but very, very much kind of makes its own sort of plot and characters from it, which I think is fine, to be honest, because there isn't really a full-on like plot in the original book. It also borrows stuff from sort of the sequel book, which is Things from the Flood. Um, Although it doesn't really go fully into the whole concept of the flood. The concept of the Things from the Flood book is that the loop, which is the name of the particle accelerator, has been decommissioned, but now stuff starts leaking out of the remains years later, and which leads to other stuff happening. And it seems like there's not going to be sort of a follow up to the actual show. There's not going to be like a Things from the Flood show or anything like that. So that's unfortunate because there actually is some stuff in the Things from the Flood book that I actually would be really curious to see in a show like this, though it probably also would be stuff that would require more of a budget, so maybe that's an issue. Um, but yeah, the show, it's very slow, it's very atmospheric, it's very much about sort of the vibe and the characters and what they're going through. And I have seen a little bit of criticism of people saying like this show doesn't really explain anything, and I don't care about that. I think the show works partly because it doesn't really explain anything. So I really like the vibe of this show. It's very slow, it's very atmospheric. I think it's still done very, very well in that sense. So if there was anything that I want you guys to check out from the list of this, again, it would be Pantheon and Tales from the Loop. Um, I think they both deserve a lot more recognition than they've been getting. So there's that. So I think that's pretty much it for the shows that I really want to talk about. Again, there are some things that I just kind of briefly mentioned, but I don't really have much to talk about them, so there. In terms of anything else to mention, I mean, I have some YouTube stuff I could go over. Not very much though this year. I already talked about Star Wars Explained. Actually, the channel that let me know about this whole Tales of the Loop thing is a channel called Curious Archive, and that focuses a lot on like speculative like worlds and like alternate worlds that people have made in fiction. A lot of it is often focusing on like here's like a world where they take biology in a weird way. So one of the main things that one of the series that they've done is focusing on oh my god, I'm blanking right now. What is it called? Holy shit, I feel really bad. It's the thing with the birds. Oh my god. It's the thing with the birds. It's the thing with the birds. Holy shit, I have to look this up. I'm sorry. Curious Archive. What the frick is it called? Serena! That's the name! God, I feel so dumb. Okay. Yeah, so, where basically the premise of it is that that like humans like find a habitable planet that doesn't have any life on it, and they seed it with like plants and like some insects and like some minnows and then like some birds. And I'm not sure if it's just one species of birds or if it's like a few different ones. But and then the whole premise of this, it's like an internet like project. It's not like a show or something. Is basically seeing how does that life evolve over hundreds of millions of years. And so the Curious Archive sort of covers that and summarizes it. And a lot of the stuff is really interesting. That's the one that I like the most. But there's a lot of other kind of alien worlds or alternative histories on Earth in terms of life or other stuff. And again, he made videos on Tales from the Loop and Things from the Flood. So that's how I got interested in that. So I definitely recommend checking that channel out. Again, Curious Archive if you're interested in stuff like that. If you want stuff that's more like kind of educational stuff, the channel that I have known about for a few years, but I definitely got a lot more into, is the channel Be Smart. I think it's another good example of a sort of educational science YouTube channel that's done really well. Also, there are two channels that are run by the same kind of group of people, History of the Earth and History of the Universe. And these are channels that produce like these kind of documentary style videos of, what that says. I personally like History of the Earth more, just because I think it's a little bit more focused, I guess the way to say, in terms of the topics that they cover. And they have been slowly going through the actual history of the Earth, from the actual formation of the Earth to, last time I checked, their most recent video was on the Ediacaran, which, if you don't know, that's right before the Cambrian explosion. So, they definitely have ways to go, but I think a lot of the videos have stuff that I didn't know about, and they're really well done, considering, again, there's just a few people kind of putting these together. It is interesting though, because sometimes I recognize like the stock footage or actually like the Google images that I know they have found that they use, because I've actually used them in like PowerPoints and stuff that I've put together, which is kind of funny. But yeah, if you're ever if you are curious about stuff like Earth history or in early universe stuff, then go check out those channels. They're definitely very impressive in terms of what they do. Um, a channel that's also another channel that has some very good sort of educational documentary style that's very interesting visually in terms of the presentation is Bobby Broccoli. Um, he has a few videos that again are very interesting in the presentation of the videos. The big ones being um, you have there's videos on there's like the man who faked an element is kind of the most recent one that I think and that's like an hour and a half. That's done really well. There's another one about I forgot the guy's name. It's the dude who faked the whole thing about like the superconductors or was it semiconductors? See, now I'm confused. It was the organic like either super or semiconductors, and there's a three-part series about that he has. There's a series about how the U.S. was going to build this big new particle accelerator that didn't happen. Um, there's videos about like the Bogdanov twins and their whole weird situation. They're just really well done videos. Um, that have again a very interesting visual style to them that's kind of unique. So definitely I would give those his channel a look out for. And then a random ass channel that I found that's just kind of weird um, is a channel that's like Posy. It's Posy. It's just this Dutch dude who just makes a bunch of weird videos, mostly about like weird tech stuff, like kind of older tech stuff. But like he has a video on like the green flash. He has a video on just like the color of leaves in autumn. Like there's a video on like light diffraction, a bunch of random shit. Like his tagline is "This channel is about everything and nothing," and the videos are just again they're presented in a weird way, but I like it. So that's another thing to kind of mention um, in terms of that. But yeah, that's kind of all I have to really say about stuff for me. The only last thing I guess, just I don't know. For me personally, this year has been kind of tiring, honestly. Um, for me, teaching this school year has been a challenge in terms of the students, largely actually. Um, and I don't know. I've like the last several days I've literally been sleeping like 10 hours a day, but for like over like a week and a half. And part of that's probably because I had COVID, but part of it's also just because I'm just fucking exhausted. So yeah, a lot of weird shit happened this year, to be honest. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot that I could say, but I kind of don't even know what to say at this point. Um, oh, I guess I should mention Dungeons and Dragons, D&D. My campaign is, last video posted was session 70, and we still have a ways to go. If you forced me to guess right now when we might finish, I might say session 90, but I'm not sure. They just got to level 16. And the plan is to go all the way to 20 for what we're doing with that. So hopefully that continues to go well. We are going to be soon approaching a fairly large shift. So we'll see how that handles and if that can work out pretty well. But also there's other campaigns that I'm playing in. Again, Julie's campaign that I'm playing in has been going pretty well. I'm still running the D&D. Well, not running it, but I'm the faculty advisor for the D&D club at the high school that I teach at, so that's fun. And I am sad because there was a campaign that I sort of joined, and then it sort of like ended up fizzling out. And then there was, as an attempt of restarting the campaign, we were going to do Tomb of Annihilation, and that lasted one session. And then there was like a few weeks of like at least one or two people being unable to do it, and then that also ended up just kind of dying. So I'm definitely at that standpoint of like I want to play more, but I also just don't have that much time most of the time. So I don't know, but there's that. I don't know. In terms of the main like D&D community as a whole, the main talk is like the whole one D&D stuff, which I don't know. My main opinion of that is overall I'm interested. I think most of the changes I've seen are at least, if not necessarily something that I actively like, it's something that I think is at least interesting. We have like over a year for things to get finalized and to see more stuff. I'm most curious to see what the changes are going to be for like barbarians and fighters and monks, but again, we'll see what happens with that. I'm overall optimistic and positive. There's definitely been a lot of people who are professing doom and gloom and how it's all falling apart and it's all horrible. Because apparently that's all people like to fucking talk about these days, which is just so annoying. But yeah, I don't know. That's my D&D thing with that. But so overall, I'm positive with that. Next year, there is some stuff that I'm interested in. Mostly the continuation of various shows and some more movies that could come out, but I'm not really sure about much about games. I mean, there's the Xenoblade 3 DLC stuff that's going to be for next year. There probably will be DLC stuff for Scarlet and Violet, which could be interesting. I don't know. There's not anything besides that I can really point to as being like super of note that I can think of off the top of my head. But hopefully things get better. We should be back to normal in terms of having my entire back and watching our stuff next week, hopefully. Um, so I guess I should at least tell you the plan for January. Um, last few times January has been shit month where we've watched bad stuff. We're not doing that this year. Instead, we basically had the idea we're tired and we want to break. So what we're doing for January is the plan is we're basically going to be going back to some shows that we started but didn't finish, and we're planning on actually finishing them. I'm not going to say which ones what we're going to do as of yet because again, we're still a little bit in flux in terms of again who's going to be available and all that kind of stuff, and so depending on when that happens, that might change the order of things and stuff like that. So I'm not going to say what we're going to be doing next, but just the overall plan is that starting next week, hopefully, we will be going back to shows that we started. Then we watched basically half of, and we're going to now watch the rest of it. So we're not going to be finishing like shows 100 episodes or something. But so think about any of the shows that we've watched over the last like year, and which are ones where we maybe watched like the first half, and now we need to kind of watch the second half. So that's the plan for January. After that, we should be continuing on with the normal movies, and hopefully things stabilize. We'll see. D&D sessions will probably start up. Probably not this Thursday, but the next one. That's the current plan. We'll see about that. Again, I am probably actually going to be running a session this week, but it's probably going to be a one-shot because I don't think everyone's going to be available, and it's not going to be in my world, so probably not going to upload that. But that's the plan. So. Also yesterday there was a video that was posted about my top 15 favorite albums released this year, music metal albums. So if you're into that, go watch that. Otherwise, this gone on for it's a little bit over an hour. Honestly, not that bad. And I think that's a good place to stop. So hopefully next week should be to like a normal show thing. See you then.